Desmond Ellis was 44 years old, and for 3 years he'd cut his wife's food into small pieces, learned to read her slurred words like a second language, and turned down a contract that would have doubled his business, all to help Adrienne walk, talk, and live again after her stroke. He never once resented her, never once questioned the sacrifice. That Tuesday afternoon, he came home early for a forgotten toolkit and heard her voice through the bedroom door, clear, fluent, laughing. No trace of the halting speech she used with him every single day. She was telling another man she just needed Desmond to finish paying off the house and vest his new business partnership. Then she'd make her move. She called him predictable, called him useful. Desmond stood frozen in that hallway, 3 years of devotion collapsing into a single sentence. He said nothing, did nothing. Not yet. But standing there, silent in his own hallway, Desmond made a decision that would end everything Adrienne thought she'd already won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen light came on at 5:15, same as every morning. Desmond Ellis moved through the dark house with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this so many times it had become part of his body. He knew which floorboard creaked near the hallway. He knew to skip it. He filled the small pot with water and set it on the back burner, then pulled Adrienne's weekly pill organizer from the cabinet above the microwave. 7 compartments. He'd set it up fresh on Sunday nights, sorting each medication by hand. The blood thinner, the anti-seizure prescription, the vitamin regimen her neurologist had recommended. He checked the Thursday compartment, counted the pills with his thumb, and set a glass of water beside them on the counter. The eggs came next, soft scrambled, never firm. Firm was too difficult for her to chew comfortably on the left side, where her jaw still tired quickly. He kept the heat low and moved the spatula in slow, steady circles. By 5:40, Adrienne was already at the kitchen table. She came in wearing her blue robe, her left hand curled loosely around a small rubber therapy ball, a dense, burgundy-colored thing the size of a tennis ball that her occupational therapist had prescribed for grip strength. She squeezed it in a slow rhythm. Squeeze, hold, release, squeeze, hold, release. Her left arm had never fully come back to her. 3 years out from the stroke, and the weakness in that whole side still lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't lift. "Morning," she said. Her voice was measured, a little thick at the edges, the way it always was first thing. "Morning." Desmond glanced at her from the stove. "Sleep okay?" She tilted her head side to side in that non-committal way. "Stiff. I'll check your pillow support before I leave." "I think it shifted again." She nodded and went back to the ball. Squeeze, hold, release. He watched her from the corner of his eye as he plated the eggs. There was a time, not long after the hospital, when things were still raw and terrifying, when moments like this had broken him open. The sight of her working that ball with such concentration, trying to coax strength back into fingers that used to type 90 words a minute, used to hollow him out in a way he couldn't name. Adrienne had been sharp, decisive, fast. A hospital administrator who ran a 100-bed department with a calendar and a look. Watching her fight for a firm grip was its own kind of grief. He'd learned to hold that grief quietly. Tuck it down below the work. He slid the eggs onto her plate and used the side of a fork to cut them into small sections before he carried it to the table. Cut the toast into 4 pieces, crusts removed because the texture bothered her. Set the plate in front of her at a slight angle. Her occupational therapist had shown him that detail, so she could manage a fork with her right hand without straining. "Juice or water with breakfast?" he asked. "Juice," she said softly. He poured a small glass of orange juice, no pulp, and added a flexible straw. Set it beside the plate. He stood there for a moment, hands at his sides, looking at the setup the way he'd look at a finished panel board, checking it over before stepping back. Everything in order. He was pulling on his work boots in the front hallway when he heard her voice change. He hadn't meant to stop and listen. He'd come back from the garage to grab his forgotten phone off the entry table, and Adrienne's bedroom door was standing open the way it usually did in the morning. She was on a call. He could hear her moving around in there, her voice carrying out into the hall. She was talking to Yolanda. He recognized her sister's name, heard Adrienne say it once, warmly, but it was the voice that made him go still. It wasn't the careful, measured voice she used at the breakfast table. It wasn't the slow, deliberate cadence she used when she needed him to repeat something. It was fluid, easy. She was laughing, a real laugh, clear and bright. And she was talking the way she used to talk before the stroke. Quick sentences. No pause between thoughts. No search for words. No, he already did most of it. I'm telling you, yo, it's practically handled. Desmond stood in the hallway with his phone in his hand. She said something else, lower now, and then laughed again. He stood there for 3 full seconds. Then he set the thought aside the same way he set aside a wire he wasn't ready to touch yet. Carefully, deliberately, with the intention of coming back to it. Stress, he told himself. People have good days and bad days. Even recovery isn't a straight line. He tucked his phone into his breast pocket and walked to the bedroom doorway. She was facing the window, still on the call. "Hey," he said. "I'm heading out. Got the Morrow Avenue job today. Probably be gone most of the day." She turned, and the fluency vanished. "Okay," she said slowly. "Be careful." He nodded. Then he picked up his toolkit and walked out to the truck. He'd made it halfway to Morrow Avenue before he realized the toolkit wasn't in the truck. Not the general bag. That one was buckled in the passenger seat. He meant the gray metal case with the conduit benders and the specialized fittings for the panel upgrade. He'd left it in the front hall closet. He remembered it clearly now, pictured it sitting on the second shelf right where he'd set it last night, which meant he'd driven 20 minutes in the wrong direction. He turned around without much frustration. It wasn't the kind of mistake that rattled him. He'd swing back, grab the case, and still make it to the site before his crew hit the part of the job they needed him for. He pulled into the driveway at 10:30. The house looked quiet. Adrienne's car sat in its usual spot. The front curtains were drawn the way she liked them in the morning. She was sensitive to light, always had been since the stroke. He unlocked the front door gently, more out of habit than anything else. She often rested late in the morning after therapy, and he'd learned a long time ago to move softly when he came home unexpectedly. He stepped inside, set his keys on the entry table without letting them jangle. The house was still. He started toward the hallway closet, and that was when he heard her. Her voice was coming from the bedroom. The door was pulled almost shut, just a thin strip of light showing at the edge. She was on the phone. He could tell by the rhythm of it, the pauses where someone else was speaking, the way she'd pick back up. He wasn't listening. Not yet. He reached the closet, pulled the door open slowly, and crouched to check the second shelf. The gray case was there. He got his fingers around the handle. Then he heard her laugh. It stopped him cold. Not because she was laughing, because of the laugh itself. It was the laugh he remembered from years ago. Loose and real. The kind that came from somewhere easy inside her. He hadn't heard that laugh since before the stroke. He'd thought, quietly, in the place inside himself where he put things he didn't want to examine, that maybe it was just gone, that the stroke had taken it with everything else. He stood up slowly. I know, but he's not going to suspect anything. That's what I'm saying." Her voice was perfect, smooth and quick, every word landing clean. No hesitation, no search, no thickness at the edges. Desmond didn't move. "He's so predictable, Preston. I've had 3 years to figure out exactly how he thinks. The name landed in his chest like something physical. Preston. He knew that name. He'd written checks made out to that name. Preston Hale, the physical therapist at Eastbridge Rehab, the one who'd been handling Adrian's ongoing PT assessments for the past 2 years. Desmond had spoken to the man exactly twice, both times in the clinic lobby, both times brief and professional. She's making real progress. We're very pleased with how she's responded to the program. Desmond stood in the hallway with the gray case in his hand, and the front door still open behind him. The house is almost paid off, Adrian said. Her voice dropped a little, took on a knowing, satisfied tone. And the partnership, he's almost fully vested. Once that locks in, the business value goes up significantly. A pause. Preston's voice, low and muffled through the speaker, said something Desmond couldn't make out. Adrienne laughed again. "Then I make my move," she said. "Simple as that." Another pause. "He won't see it coming. He's useful, Preston. He's been incredibly useful, but that's all this is." The words didn't echo. They just sat there. Useful. 3 years of 5:15 mornings. 3 years of soft scrambled eggs and cut toast and flexible straws. 3 years of sorted pill organizers and canceled contracts, and nights lying awake running through her medication schedule in his head to make sure he hadn't missed anything. Useful. His grip on the case tightened. He could feel the metal handle pressing into his palm, the ridged edge of it sharp against his fingers. He focused on that. The physical sensation of it. Something real and solid to hold on to while the floor tried to go sideways beneath him. He did not move toward the bedroom door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a sound. He stood in that hallway for a few more seconds, long enough to hear her laugh one more time, and then he walked back the way he'd come, slow, quiet, the same way he'd entered. He pulled the front door shut behind him with the softest click. He walked to the truck. He put the gray case behind the seat, got in, and closed the door. He put both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The street was ordinary and still. A neighbor's sprinkler ticked somewhere down the block. A cloud moved across the sun, and the light in the driveway shifted, went pale for a moment, then came back. Desmond sat there and said nothing at all. Desmond sat in the truck for 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock on the dash. Not on purpose, just something to look at that wasn't the front of his house. 11:31, 11:32, 11:33. He breathed, slow and even, the way he did when he was working in a tight space, a crawl under a raised floor, say, or inside a breaker panel where one wrong move cost you more than just time. You didn't rush in those places. You slowed down. You looked at everything before you touched anything. He's so predictable, Preston. He pressed the thought flat, didn't let himself follow it anywhere. Not yet. He had a crew on Morrow Avenue waiting on him. He had a panel upgrade that wasn't going to do itself. He put the truck in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and drove. He worked until 5 o'clock without stopping for lunch. It wasn't unusual. When a job had his full attention, eating was easy to forget. Today he gave the job every single thing he had. And even then, the work was only using half of him. The other half was somewhere quiet and cold, turning things over, examining them the way he examined wiring, methodically, without flinching, looking for exactly where the fault was. By the time he drove home, he had made his decision. No confrontation. Not today. Not until he knew exactly what he was dealing with and had something solid in his hands to back it up. Saying something now would only make her careful. She'd close up, adjust her performance, and he'd lose whatever advantage he currently had, which was the only thing that mattered. She didn't know he'd heard her. That meant the clock was his, not hers. He would be patient. He was good at patient. He pulled into the driveway, took a breath, and walked inside. Adrienne was in the living room when he came in. She was in her usual chair. the one with the padded armrest she rested her left side on. Her speech was slow when she said hello. She asked about his day in that careful, measured way she had, words arriving one beat behind where they should, like she was wading through something thick to get to each one. Long day, he said. Panel job ran over. He went to the kitchen and started dinner. He made the things she said helped her. Soft rice, braised chicken, nothing with a texture she'd have to work too hard to chew. He set her plate the way he always did. Cut things smaller than necessary. Placed her medication cup beside her glass. He did all of it, but he watched. Not in a way she'd notice. He knew how to look at something without looking at it. Electricians learned that fast. You could see the whole room from a wire you were threading if you paid attention the right way. When he went to the kitchen to refill his water, he left her plate with one piece of chicken too far to the right, farther than she could reach comfortably if her left side weakness was what she always told him it was. He came back 3 minutes later. The piece was gone. She was cutting the next piece, left hand working the fork, no tremor, no hesitation, and when she heard him come in, her hand slowed. The fork dropped slightly. Her left shoulder dropped with it. Desmond sat down and picked up his own fork. "You need anything else?" he asked. "No," she said. "I'm okay." He nodded and ate his dinner. He waited until well after midnight. Adrian had been asleep for almost 2 hours. He sat in the kitchen with the lights off, just the small bulb above the stove giving the room a low amber glow. His phone was on the table in front of him. He wasn't angry. Or rather, the anger was there, but it was locked in a room he wasn't opening. He'd deal with it later, when it was useful. Right now, it was only in the way. He picked up the phone and called Otis. His brother answered on the third ring, voice clear. No sleep in it. Otis had always been a night person. "Des." A pause. "It's late." "I know." "Everything all right?" "No," Desmond said. "But I'm not calling about that." He could hear Otis going still on the other end. That was an old habit between them. Otis knew when to stop asking and start listening. Desmond laid it out cleanly. The overheard call. The name Preston Hale. The clinic visits. The business partnership timeline she was tracking. He told it the way he'd write up a job estimate. Factual, ordered, nothing left out, and nothing added for effect. When he finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "How long?" Otis asked. "I don't know." "That's what I need to find out." "You want documentation." "I want everything," Desmond said. "Movements, appointments, anything she's doing that isn't on any calendar I've seen. I want to know what's real and what isn't." Another short silence. "Okay," Otis said. "I'm in." Desmond set the phone down on the table. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Outside, the street was dark and still. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular. He was ready. The next morning, Desmond made breakfast and set the plates on the table. He didn't cut her food. He placed everything the same way he always did. The soft eggs, the toast cut in half, the small glass of orange juice. But he left the toast in 2 halves instead of 4 quarters. Left the eggs in 1 piece instead of the careful small bites he'd been making for 3 years. Then he sat down across from her and ate. Adrienne looked at her plate. A small pause. Then she picked up her fork with her right hand and broke the eggs apart herself. Slow, but not struggling. Deliberate. She picked up the toast with her left hand and took a bite from the corner. Desmond kept his eyes on his own plate. "Sleep okay?" he asked. She said. "Better than usual." He nodded and drank his coffee. Over the following days, he pulled back in small ways. Nothing dramatic. Nothing she could point to and name. He stopped walking her items over from the counter. If she needed her water glass, he left it where she could reach it herself. He stopped reaching past her to open cabinet doors. He stopped hovering near her chair when she stood up. She barely seemed to notice. That told him something. A person who truly needed help noticed right away when it disappeared. They'd say something, ask, get frustrated. Adrienne just adjusted, quietly and without comment, the way you adjust when you no longer need to pretend. He watched her from the corner of his eye, the way he'd watched that piece of chicken 3 nights ago. And every day she gave him a little more to see, a quicker reach, a steadier hand. Small things, but they added up. Otis called on a Thursday afternoon, 4 days after their late-night conversation. Desmond was on a job site in Cloverdale, crouched in a utility room running conduit, when his phone buzzed. He stepped outside. "Talk to me," he said. "She drove herself to a clinic on Fairview this morning," Otis said. "Not the rehab center, different location. Not on any schedule you gave me." Desmond said nothing, so Otis kept going. Preston Hale works a satellite clinic out of that building on Tuesdays and Thursdays, off the books from the main rehab center. She was there for about 40 minutes. Then she drove across town to a First National branch on Clemson Road. "That's not our bank." "No," Otis said. "It's not." Desmond looked out at the street. A woman was walking a dog. A truck idled at the light. The world moving through itself, unbothered. "How was she driving?" he asked. "Smooth, no hesitation. Parked herself in a tight spot on Fairview without any problem." A pause. "She moved like a woman running errands, Des. Nothing about it looked like someone with a mobility issue." "What days has this happened?" He could hear Otis flipping through something on the other end. "Tuesday, Thursday of last week, this morning. You want to know what those days have in common?" "Job sites," Desmond said. "Every single one. I checked your schedule against hers. Every trip she's taken happened on a day you were away at a site. Not a coincidence." Desmond pressed his back against the building's exterior wall and tilted his head up at the sky, pale blue. A few thin clouds stretched out and going nowhere. "Keep going," he said. "I need photos, timestamps, everything you can get." "Already building the file," Otis said. At home, Desmond was exactly who he'd always been. He asked about her pain levels in the evening. He made sure her prescriptions were filled. He kept his voice soft and his manner steady. He said goodnight, and meant it to sound like nothing had changed, because nothing could look like it had. Meanwhile, the file Otis was building grew. Photos of Adrienne walking from her car to the Fairview clinic, left arm swinging at her side, easy and loose. A timestamp showing her at the separate bank branch, standing at the counter without her cane. A still image of her carrying a folder tucked under her left arm, the same arm she let hang limp whenever Desmond was nearby. He saved everything to a drive he kept locked in his truck. He didn't look at the images more than once each. He didn't need to. He'd seen what was there. Looking again was only emotion, and emotion wasn't useful yet. On a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after that night in the kitchen, Desmond drove to a small office building on the west side of town and climbed the stairs to the second floor. The door at the end of the hall had a simple brass plate bolted beside it. Whitfield Law, Family and Civil Matters. He knocked twice. A voice from inside said, "It's open." Camille Whitfield was behind her desk with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a pen tucked behind her ear, looking exactly like a woman who didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper. Certificates lined the wall in dark frames. She looked up at him, and her expression shifted. Not surprise, but recognition of something serious coming through the door. "Desmond," she said. "Sit down." He sat. He placed the drive on the desk between them. "I need help understanding what I'm looking at," he said. Camille took the drive without a word. She plugged it into her laptop, pulled her reading glasses down from her forehead, and clicked through the files one by one. Photos, timestamps, Otis's notes typed in plain, clipped sentences. She didn't react much. Her face stayed still and professional, the way a doctor's face stays still when reading a scan they've already made up their mind about. Desmond sat across from her and waited. The office was quiet except for the occasional click of her mouse and the low hum of the building's ventilation. A half-empty coffee mug sat at the corner of her desk. A yellow legal pad sat next to it with a few lines already written on it, though he couldn't read them from where he sat. Finally, she said, "How long has Otis been running this?" 2 weeks. She nodded. "Good documentation. He include the addresses?" "Clinic on Fairview, bank branch on Clemson Road." She wrote something down. Then she looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "You bring your financial records? Joint accounts?" He reached into the folder he'd carried in and set 3 months of bank statements on her desk. "Last 3 months on paper. I also emailed you login credentials for the joint account portal last night." She glanced at her screen, found the email, and opened the account dashboard without asking further questions. For a while, she just scrolled. Desmond kept his hands loose in his lap and said nothing. It took her about 12 minutes. He knew she'd found something because her scrolling slowed down, then stopped. Her head tilted slightly to one side, the way a person tilts when they're deciding whether what they're seeing is really what they think it is. Then she opened a second window, then a third. She started cross-referencing, pulling numbers from one screen to another, her pen moving across the legal pad in short, quick strokes. "Tell me about the medical reimbursements on this account," she said. "What do you mean?" "There are recurring transfers going out of your joint account." She turned the laptop to face him and pointed. "See these line items, all labeled medical reimbursement. They go back 14 months. Some of them are small, 100 and change. Some are bigger. This one here is $480. Desmond leaned forward and looked at the screen. The entries were there, steady and unremarkable, buried among the utility bills and grocery charges and insurance premiums. He'd seen the account dozens of times. He'd never noticed them. Why would he? Medical costs made sense. They'd been living inside medical costs for 3 years. "I assumed those were copays," he said. "Out-of-pocket stuff her insurance didn't cover." "That's what they're meant to look like." Camille turned the laptop back. "But I've pulled up your insurance portal here, and when I match these amounts against your actual explanation of benefit statements, what the insurance company actually paid out, what your copays were supposed to be, these transfers don't line up." She tapped the legal pad. "Some of these reimbursements have no corresponding claim at all." The room felt very still. "So she's moving money," Desmond said, "systematically, from your joint account into a solo account under her name, using fabricated medical costs as the label so it blends in." Camille pulled her glasses off and held them loosely in one hand. "Desmond, this goes back over a year. While you were covering the mortgage, the utilities, the actual medical bills, the groceries, she was siphoning from the same account." He didn't say anything right away. He thought about the contract he'd turned down 18 months ago. Big commercial job in Dalton. Would have taken 4 months and put $32,000 into business expansion. He'd turned it down to stay close to home, to be available, because she needed him. He pressed his thumb into the edge of the folder in his lap and kept his voice even. "How much total?" he asked. Camille looked at her notes. "Based on what I can see here, close to $11,000. He nodded once. "This is relevant in 2 ways," Camille said, putting her glasses back on. "First, in a divorce proceeding, this constitutes marital waste, a spouse intentionally depleting shared assets. That affects how a judge divides property. Second, if those medical reimbursement labels were used to misrepresent withdrawals, and if those same labels were submitted anywhere as documentation to an insurance company, to a benefits administrator, that moves from civil territory into fraud. Can you prove it?" "I can build toward it." She clicked something, then looked at him. "But to do that properly, I need to see the actual medical records behind her ongoing disability claims, the physical therapy evaluations, the functional assessments, the paperwork that's been justifying her status for the past 3 years. How do you get those? Subpoena. She said it simply. I file quietly, through proper channels, and I request them directly from the clinic and the supervising physicians. She paused. It takes a little time, and I need you to let me handle the pace. No confrontations, nothing that tips her off before I have what I need. He held her gaze. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. He gave her a single nod. Then, do it. Camille set her pen down and looked at him the way someone looks at a person they respect enough to be honest with. Desmond. Her voice dropped just slightly. I want you to be prepared. What I find in those records, it may be worse than what's already on this table. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Desmond was on a job site in Marietta, 60 feet up in a scissor lift, running conduit through the ceiling of a new commercial building. His phone buzzed in his vest pocket. He glanced at the screen. Camille Whitfield. He finished securing the bracket he was holding, climbed down, and called her back from the parking lot with the sound of nail guns and generator hum behind him. Can you come in tomorrow morning? She said. 8 o'clock. What did you find? A pause. Come in tomorrow. Her office looked different this time. Or maybe it was the same and he was just more awake to it. The records were spread across her desk in 2 distinct groupings, separated by about 8 inches of empty space, the way you'd separate 2 things that didn't belong near each other. A yellow sticky note marked a page in the left stack. 3 pages in the right stack had sections highlighted in orange. Camille was already standing when he walked in. She didn't offer coffee. She just pointed to the chair and got straight to it. These, she said, putting her hand on the right stack, are the official functional assessments filed to support Adrienne's continued disability benefits and your approved caregiver leave. These are what the insurance company has on file. These are what justified your status as a full-time caregiver. She moved her hand to the left stack. These are the actual clinical therapy notes, the real ones, written by the treating staff at the clinic during her sessions. Desmond looked at the 2 stacks. They don't match, he said. They don't come close. Camille pulled her chair around so she was sitting beside the desk instead of behind it. She picked up the highlighted pages from the right stack. The official assessments say Adrienne has demonstrated, and I'm reading directly here, significant and ongoing impairment of left side motor function, inability to perform fine motor tasks independently, requiring continued in-home caregiving support for daily living activities. The most recent one was filed 4 months ago. She set that page down and picked up the clinical notes. The actual session notes from 18 months ago say her left grip strength had returned to 73%. Her gait was rated functional for independent living. Her occupational therapist noted, again, I'm reading directly, patient demonstrates capacity to perform most activities of daily living without assistance. Transition to independent living recommended. The nail gun sounds from yesterday's job site were still somewhere in the back of his head. He pushed them out. 18 months ago, he said. 18 months ago. He sat with that for a moment. 18 months ago, he had turned down the Dalton contract. 18 months ago, he had still been cutting her food at the dinner table, getting up before dawn to manage her medications, restructuring his entire business schedule around a woman who, according to her own clinical record, no longer needed any of it. Who signed the official assessments? He asked. His voice was flat, controlled. Camille turned the page and pointed. Preston Hale, PT, DPT. Desmond looked at that signature for a long moment. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind of signature a man uses when he signs his name often enough that it's become a habit. He's her therapist, Desmond said. He was, and he used that position to file falsified functional evaluations with the insurance company. Evaluations that directly contradicted what the treating staff was documenting in the actual clinical record. Camille folded her hands on the desk. Desmond, this isn't just divorce material. What I'm looking at here is insurance fraud. Documented, structured, sustained over at least 18 months, possibly longer. and my caregiver leave. The reduced contracts were built on those falsified evaluations. Whoever needed to justify why Adrian still required full-time at-home care, that paperwork gave them the reason. You weren't just emotionally manipulated. She said it plainly, the way she said everything. You were the cover story. Your unpaid labor, your shortened hours, your presence in that house, all of it made the fraud look legitimate. The room was very quiet. He thought about the 3 years of early mornings, the medications lined up on the counter, the business calls he'd cut short to get home, the version of himself that had believed, completely and without question, that this was what love required. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs and said nothing for a moment. Then, what happens next? I flagged this to the insurance fraud unit, separately from the divorce filing. The 2 tracks run parallel. She looked at him steadily. But I want you to understand. Once I make that referral, the timeline accelerates. Things will start moving that can't be stopped. Good, he said. He stood, shook her hand, and walked out. He didn't go back to the job site. He drove east, away from the city, watching the buildings thin out into strip malls and then gas stations and then open road. His hands were steady on the wheel. His jaw was tight. 40 minutes later, he pulled into the parking lot of a low brick building with a plain sign out front. OE Investigations, LLC. He cut the engine and sat there for a second. Then he got out and went inside to find his brother. Otis's office was small and smelled like old coffee and printer ink. A row of filing cabinets lined one wall. A corkboard on the other held printed photos, strings of dates, and handwritten notes in Otis's tight, cramped handwriting. It looked chaotic until you studied it. Then you saw the order underneath. Desmond had just finished walking Otis through what Camille had found when Otis's front door opened. They both turned. Yolanda Price stood in the doorway. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red at the edges, and she was gripping her purse strap with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She was wearing a gray cardigan, even though it was close to 80 degrees outside, and she had the look of someone who had been arguing with themselves in the car the whole drive over. She looked at Otis first. Then her eyes moved to Desmond and stayed there. "How did you know I'd be?" Desmond asked. "I didn't." Her voice was small. "I went to the house first, then your job site. Your foreman told me to try here." She swallowed. "Desmond, I need to talk to you. Just you, please." Otis looked at his brother. Desmond gave a small nod. Otis grabbed his coffee mug, pushed open the door to the back room, and pulled it shut behind him without a word. Yolanda sat in the chair across from Desmond. She set her purse on the floor and stared at it for a moment. Her hands were trembling slightly. "I've been carrying this for a long time," she said. "Then put it down," Desmond said. She looked up at him. He wasn't being cruel. His voice was even, quiet, the same voice he used when he was telling someone to take their time, that he had all day. She seemed to recognize that, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "Preston and Adrian," she started. She stopped, started again. It didn't start after the stroke. The room got very still. "How long before?" Desmond asked. "At least 2 years. Maybe more." She pressed her lips together. "I found out by accident. She called me one night. This was back when you two were still living in the other house, the one on Fenwick. And she was upset. She'd had a fight with Preston. I didn't even know who he was then." She slipped, caught herself, tried to walk it back. Yolanda shook her head slowly. "I let her, because she was my sister, because I told myself it wasn't my business." Desmond said nothing. He just listened. The night she had the stroke, Yolanda's voice dropped. "She wasn't alone when it happened. You were working late. Preston was there. At the house." She finally looked him directly in the eye. "You came home earlier than expected. She heard your truck. There was a fight between them." Her and Preston, trying to get him out before you came inside. She got herself worked up. She was already stressed. And then she pressed 2 fingers to the side of her own head. Just like that. Desmond sat very still. He thought about that night, coming through the front door to a dark, quiet house, calling Adrienne's name, finding her on the bedroom floor. He had blamed himself for months for being late, for not being there sooner. He had turned that night over and over in his mind for 3 years, carrying a guilt that had never fully gone away. It had never been his fault. She let you think your devotion was saving her, Yolanda said. Her voice cracked on the last word. And when she realized what the stroke gave her, the sympathy, your guilt, the insurance money, the time, she used it. All of it. And I didn't say anything. She picked up her purse and held it against her chest. I'm sorry, Desmond. I am so sorry. The room was quiet for a long time. Did she ask you to keep quiet? He asked. Yolanda nodded. And you're telling me now because I saw what you gave up. Her eyes filled. I watched you. For 3 years. I watched you carry her. And I knew. I knew the whole time. She shook her head. That's not something I can keep living with. Otis came back in 20 minutes later without being asked. He looked at Desmond's face, read it the way only a brother could, and sat down. How bad? He said. The affair started before the stroke, Desmond said. Preston was in the house the night it happened. She nearly got caught. He said it the same way he'd say anything else. Level. Contained. She's been using the stroke as cover ever since. Otis was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose. Okay, he said. I need to call Camille, Desmond said. I want all 3 of us in a room today. Camille's conference table had seen harder conversations, probably, but not by much. She listened to Yolanda's account without interrupting, taking notes in her careful, small handwriting. When Yolanda finished, Camille set down her pen and looked at Desmond. You have the recorded call, she said. The surveillance, the bank records, the falsified therapy evaluations. And now, a first-hand witness to the affair's actual timeline and the circumstances of the stroke. She said it evenly, like she was reading items off a checklist. There is nothing left to find, Desmond. This is the whole picture. Desmond nodded. So, what do we do with it? Otis asked. Camille folded her hands. We don't show our hand yet. We let Adrienne believe she's still on schedule. She looked at Desmond. She's waiting on one thing. The business partnership vesting. That's her payday. That's when she plans to move. A pause. What if she believed it was finally happening? Desmond understood immediately. She relaxes, he said. Stops watching for anything. Thinks she made it. And while she's relaxed, Camille said, I file. She tapped the table once. Divorce petition citing financial fraud and marital waste. Documentation of the diverted funds, the fraudulent reimbursements, the falsified medical evaluations. I file it the same week she thinks her timeline is complete. By the time she realizes what's happening, it's already done. Otis leaned back in his chair. She won't see it coming. She never saw him coming, Camille said, and she nodded once at Desmond. She made that mistake a long time ago. The plan was set. That evening, Desmond sat across from Adrienne at the kitchen table. Dinner was simple. She had managed most of it herself, though she still performed small hesitations for his benefit. A slight pause before lifting her glass. A subtle slowness when reaching for the salt. He watched it now for what it was. A performance. He waited until she was nearly finished eating before he said it. Casual and easy. The way a man mentions something that's been in the works a long time. I talked to the attorneys today. The partnership paperwork should be finalized by the end of next week. She looked up at him. For just a fraction of a second, barely a beat, barely anything, her eyes changed. Something moved behind them. Satisfaction, quick and sharp, gone almost as fast as it arrived. Then she arranged her face into something soft and supportive. "That's wonderful, baby," she said. "You worked so hard for that." "Yeah," Desmond said. He picked up his fork and took a bite. "I really did." The kitchen smelled like coffee. Desmond had made a full pot, the way he always did on weekday mornings. 2 mugs on the counter. Everything in its place. The morning light came through the window over the sink and fell across the table in a wide, pale stripe. He sat down first. He set the folder in the center of the table. It was plain, just a standard manila folder, nothing dramatic about it. But it was thick. 3 weeks of work, compressed into something that fit in one hand. Adrienne came in from the hallway in her robe, her hair tied back. She moved toward the coffee maker without looking at him, one hand trailing lightly along the counter, the way she always did. The careful performance, the practiced slowness. "Sit down, Adrienne," Desmond said. Something in his voice made her stop. She turned and looked at him. He wasn't looking at the folder. He was looking at her, calm, still. The way he looked when he was standing at a job site and already knew exactly where the problem was. She sat down. He opened the folder. "I want to walk you through some things," he said. "Take your time with each one." He started with the phone call. He placed a single printed page on the table, a transcript, time-stamped, with a small notation in Camille's handwriting at the top corner. He tapped it once. "3 weeks ago, Tuesday. You were on speakerphone with Preston." He kept his voice level. "You told him you needed me to finish paying off the house and vest the business partnership before you made your move. You called me predictable." A pause. "You called me useful." Adrienne stared at the page. Her jaw tightened. "Desmond." "The bank records," he said, and he placed the next set of documents beside the first. Her eyes moved to them. "Over a year of transfers from our joint account. Routed through reimbursement claims, medical expenses that never happened. Your name on a solo account at a branch across town." He let her look at the numbers, at the dates, at the pattern that was impossible to explain away. Camille cross-referenced every single one against actual insurance payouts. Not one of them matches a real expense. The color shifted in Adrienne's face. A slow drain, like someone had pulled a plug. "And then there's this." He set down the therapy records. "Preston signed your evaluations, the ones that said you still had severe functional impairment, the ones that kept your disability benefits active and kept me on reduced contracts to care for you." He placed Preston's falsified notes beside the actual subpoenaed therapy records. "These are the real notes, the ones from the clinic's own file. According to those, you had recovered most of your function 18 months ago." She said nothing. 18 months, Desmond said quietly. Adrienne's hands came up from her lap and pressed flat against the edge of the table. "You don't understand how this looks compared to how it felt. My recovery wasn't just physical. It was—" And then Yolanda came to see me. The hands stopped moving. Desmond watched the moment land. He didn't rush past it. "She told me the affair started before the stroke. 2 years before, at least." His voice didn't waver, not even slightly. "She told me Preston was in the house the night it happened, that you heard my truck, that the 2 of you were trying to get him out before I came inside, that you got yourself worked up and—" He paused, just for a beat. "I spent a long time blaming myself for that night, wondering if I'd gotten home sooner or done something different." He looked at her directly. "I won't be doing that anymore." What was left of Adrienne's composure fractured. First came the tears. They came fast, and they might have even been real. It was hard to know anymore, and Desmond had stopped trying to tell the difference. "I was sick," she said, her voice breaking. "I was actually sick, Desmond. I was scared. Everything that happened. Yes, things got complicated, but I needed—" "You needed me to be predictable," he said. Her chin trembled. Then something shifted behind her eyes. the calculation clicking back on beneath the tears, like a light switching over. Her voice changed. "You won't get the house," she said. "I'll contest everything. I have grounds for ongoing support. My condition—" "Your condition has already been reviewed," Desmond said. He reached into the folder one more time and set down the final page. Camille filed the divorce petition 4 days ago. Financial fraud. Marital waste. The documentation is already with the court. He laid his hand flat on the paper once, then pulled it back. And a separate copy of the falsified medical evaluations was forwarded to the insurance company's fraud investigation unit the same morning. Adrienne's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Desmond stood. He picked up the folder, closed it, and tucked it under his arm. He looked at her sitting there at the table. The same table where he had cut her food into small pieces for 3 years, arranged her pills in a row, poured her water at just the right temperature so it wouldn't startle her throat. She looked very small. He didn't say anything else. He walked down the hallway, picked up the bag he had packed the night before, and walked out the front door. The updates came in pieces. That was how Camille worked. She didn't call with drama. She called with facts, delivered in the same flat, precise tone she probably used in a courtroom. Desmond had learned to appreciate that. Every time his phone buzzed with her name on the screen, he knew she wasn't going to waste his time. The first call came 9 days after he walked out of the house. "Preston Hale was terminated this morning," Camille said. The clinic pulled his file the same day the subpoenaed records were shared with the licensing board. It didn't take them long. Falsifying patient evaluations isn't a gray area. A short pause. "His license is suspended pending a full review. He won't be practicing while that investigation is open." Could be permanent. Desmond was sitting in the break room at a job site when the call came, a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He nodded to himself, though no one was watching. "And Adrienne?" he asked. "He hasn't contacted her," Camille said. "From what I can tell, he went quiet the moment his name showed up on the fraud referral. He retained his own attorney. He's not offering her anything." Desmond wasn't surprised. A man who built his whole life on official paperwork and careful positioning wasn't going to go down holding someone else's hand. Preston had always been a safe distance kind of person. Safe distance from risk. Safe distance from consequences. Safe distance, it turned out, from Adrienne too. The moment the ground shifted under them both. "She's on her own," Desmond said. "She's on her own," Camille confirmed. The second call came 2 weeks after that. The insurance company had opened a formal investigation into Adrienne's disability claim history. Camille explained it without softening any of it. The company was clawing back payments made during the period the falsified evaluations were in effect. 18 months of benefits, recalculated and billed back. The numbers were significant. "They've also referred it to the fraud unit for possible prosecution," Camille added. "That's out of my hands now. It's between them and the DA's office. But the civil side, the divorce, that documentation strengthens our position considerably." Desmond pressed his thumb against his coffee mug. "How does this affect the asset division?" "Favorably." He could hear Camille clicking through something on her end. "The financial waste argument is solid. The diverted funds, the fraudulent reimbursement claims, all of it is documented and tied directly to marital assets. The court is not going to be sympathetic to her position." She was right. The court wasn't. The proceedings moved faster than Desmond had expected. Camille had warned him that contested divorces could drag on, but Adrienne's ability to contest anything was quietly hollowed out by the weight of the evidence against her. Her attorney, the one she'd managed to retain before her finances tightened, filed 2 motions that went nowhere. The falsified records weren't going to disappear. The bank transfers weren't going to unhappen. The timeline Yolanda had given them wasn't going anywhere either. Adrienne got a fraction of the marital assets. The court confirmed the house as Desmond's. He had paid the mortgage alone for the better part of the last 3 years, and the paper trail made that impossible to argue. The business, which Desmond had built before they married and continued to build under his own name during the caregiving years, stayed his entirely. She walked away with less than she had put in, which was not much. Yolanda called him the week the final settlement was being drafted. She didn't say much. She didn't try to explain or relitigate anything. She just said she was sorry and that she wanted him to know she was keeping her distance from her sister for now. "I can't be around her right now, Desmond," she said. Her voice was thin. "I just can't." "I understand," he said. "She's not. She's not the person I thought she was. Or maybe she was always that person, and I didn't want to see it." A pause. "I should have come to you sooner." "You came when you came," Desmond said. "That's enough." She started showing up at family gatherings, his Aunt Vera's Sunday dinners, a birthday cookout for Otis. She sat with his people and ate their food and didn't ask for anything. He let her. She was carrying her own weight in all of this, and she was carrying it honestly. That counted for something. The final document was a single page. Camille set it on the desk in front of him on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, with a pen beside it and no ceremony. The office smelled like old paper and the faint trace of her afternoon coffee. A small desk fan hummed in the corner. Outside the window, the parking lot sat flat and quiet under a gray sky. Desmond read it through once, then again. Then he signed it. Camille dated and notarized it without a word, slipped it into a manila envelope, and held out her hand. "It's done," she said. He shook it. "Thank you, Camille." He picked up his jacket from the chair, tucked it over one arm, and walked out of the office and down the short hallway to the door. He pushed it open. The October air came at him cool and flat. He stopped just outside the door. He exhaled. It started somewhere deep, down in his chest, below the ribs, and it came out slow, like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time, finally allowed to release. He stood there in the parking lot for a moment, jacket over his arm, the gray sky overhead, the quiet all around him, just breathing. The workshop smelled like copper wire and sawdust, and the particular kind of grease that never fully washed out of a man's hands. Desmond walked through it slowly, the way he walked through a finished job site before signing off, not checking for problems, just taking it in. The space was nearly twice what it used to be. They'd knocked out the back wall 8 months ago and poured new concrete, expanding into what had been a storage lot behind the original unit. New shelving ran the full length of the east wall, organized by gauge and application, labeled in Desmond's own handwriting. The equipment was newer. The crew was bigger. It had taken him 3 years to shelve this expansion. It had taken him 18 months to build it. He stopped at the center workbench and picked up a coil of wire, checked the label, set it back down. Everything in its place. He had always liked that about this work. The logic of it, the way things either connected properly or they didn't. No ambiguity, no performance. It either carried current or it didn't. "Des!" Otis's voice came from the far end of the workshop, where a glass-walled office now sat in the corner. The door was open. Otis was behind the desk, jacket on, phone pressed to his shoulder. He held up 2 fingers, 2 minutes, and disappeared back into his call. The security consulting division had been Otis's idea, though Desmond had seen it coming before Otis said it out loud. A private investigator who was already doing insurance fraud work, already running surveillance, already building a network of contacts in corporate risk management. It wasn't a stretch. It was a natural fit. They'd formalized it 7 months ago. Ellis Security Consulting operated out of the same building, shared overhead, and had already landed 3 mid-size corporate clients. Desmond had Otis. Otis had Desmond. It worked cleanly, the same way it always had between them. At the far end of the main floor, a pair of legs stuck out from under a partially disassembled panel board, Jeans, steel-toed boots, one lace coming undone. Marcus, 22 years old, 2 months into his apprenticeship, already asking better questions than men twice his age. "You retorqued those terminals yet?" Desmond called, a clatter of metal. "Working on it. Work faster." "Yes, sir." Desmond crouched beside the panel board and looked underneath. Marcus had the connections laid out cleanly, better than yesterday. He was learning to slow down before he rushed, which was the hardest thing to teach, and the most valuable thing to know. "Good," Desmond said. Just that. He heard Marcus stop moving for half a second, absorbing the word, storing it. Desmond remembered being that age, how much a single quiet affirmation from someone you respected could carry. He didn't say it lightly. He left the workshop at 4:15, stopping for gas on his way home. The truck was a 1973 Chevy C10 he'd picked up from an estate sale 11 months ago for $800, mostly rust and stubbornness. He'd been restoring it in his garage on evenings and weekends, not to flip it, not because anyone asked him to, but because he liked having something to work on with his hands that had nothing to do with a contract or a timeline, something that was just his. The paint was still primer gray, and the passenger window stuck, but the engine ran clean and the frame was solid. He pulled in at the pump, got out, and started the fueling process on autopilot. Card in, grade selected, nozzle set, while his eyes moved across the lot out of habit. He saw her near the entrance. Adrienne. She was standing beside a small, older sedan he didn't recognize, waiting for the pump to finish. She was wearing a gray jacket, her hair pulled back simply. None of the careful grooming and put-together composure she used to carry like armor. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not in height, she hadn't shrunk, but in some other way, like the air that used to surround her had thinned out. She was alone. She looked up. Their eyes met across the lot. 30 feet of gray concrete and wind-blown gas station air between them. She held his gaze for a moment, just a moment, and in her face he could see the faint wreckage of everything that had collapsed. The investigation, the fraud referral, Preston's exit, the settlement, all of it was there, sitting quietly behind her eyes. He felt nothing sharp, no heat behind his ribs, no clenching in his jaw. What he felt was closer to stillness. The kind that comes when something that used to have power over you simply doesn't anymore. He gave her a single nod. Not warm, not cruel, just acknowledgement. The smallest possible recognition that he saw her standing there, and that she no longer occupied any space in him that mattered. She looked away first. Desmond turned back to the pump. The numbers clicked upward. He watched them without hurry. When the nozzle clicked off, he replaced it, capped his tank, and got back into the truck. He adjusted the mirror out of habit. He pulled out of the lot and onto the road without looking back. The engine ran clean and steady beneath him. He thought, quietly, about the last 3 years. Not the pain of it, not the waste of it, but the shape of it. How he had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to him and refused to let it make him loud or reckless. How he had waited. How he had moved carefully and precisely, the way he always did with wiring that could burn a building down if handled wrong. Patience wasn't what people thought it was. Most people treated it like something passive, like waiting was the same as doing nothing. But patience, real patience, the kind that held its shape under pressure, was a choice made over and over again every single day. It required more from a man than anger ever did. Anger was easy. This had never been easy, and it had been the sharpest thing he had. The road opened up ahead of him, flat and clear, and Desmond Ellis drove. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.